Today, I'm very lucky to have Keith Jackson with me, who on your LinkedIn, Keith, it says award-winning CEO and UK Director of the Year. So we are privileged to talk to you. And today is all about just hearing your insights about culture. We met at the Charter Directors conference and we could see we had a lot in common. We were saying a lot of the same things. So really interested here to dig a little deeper on your approach and thoughts about culture. And the reason we do this is to share it with our Culture Smart community and also broader for people who are culture enthusiasts. And it's all about learning tidbits and ideas and broadening our mind to an approach to culture. So, Keith, first of all, tell me a shortened version of how did you end up where you are today?
Oh, my goodness. Well, long and winding road. I started out as an engineer, and I was fortunate to be sponsored through university by Jaguar cars. So I was really good grounding in a large company early in my career to have that really good grounding. And maybe two other things. One, I was on the management development program, so some very specific management training, very structured management training, which was a real blessing very early in my career. And the other thing, about halfway through my time at Jaguar, they're actually bought by Ford Motor Company. So there was a massive change program. And there was lots that were really positive about Jaguar, but there was lots that Ford, not surprisingly, brought to the party. So to actually be involved, not just to witness, but to be involved in that change program was really, really impactful, as I say, at very early stages of my career. But then I got involved in medical products, principally because at university I was exposed to medical engineering, and I thought this has a real strong sense of purpose, and I'm sure we'll come back to purpose. And so for the last, my goodness, 35 years, I've been involved in all kinds of different medical companies. It's a very interesting, it's a very cross-functional, multidisciplinary sector. Mm-hmm. And I found that tremendously rewarding. And I've had leadership, all kinds of leadership roles along that journey, including 2 CEO roles. And the one thing, and maybe this is a good place to sort of springboard into the next part of the conversation, the one thing that has resonated with me all the way through that is it's all about people. And how everybody says that, or many people say that, it really is. It's all about people. Everything else is admin.
Because what do you mean, Keith, when you, because it's kind of banded out there, it's all about the people, the people are a more important asset. But what does it mean to you when you say it's all about the people?
Well, I think I'm not just thinking here about
probably thinking for more than you personally, probably as if you were sitting as, you've done 2 CEO roles there. What, like when you were saying a CEO role and you're saying it's all about people, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think when I say people, it isn't just employees, of course. They may be customers. They could be suppliers, they could be partners, there could be other stakeholders, and of course, employees, very important. But I think actually putting employees at the center of the business and thinking about how we proactively and very systematically develop every single employee is hugely important. The world keeps changing. It's probably never been more uncertain than it is right now. So I think that sort of agility that's needed, much needed, particularly in small, medium-sized businesses where I've spent most of my career. I think very deliberately developing people, giving them opportunities to have new experiences, to have improved authority, actually, because often we give people more responsibility. We don't necessarily give them the increased authority and actually empowering people to make decisions, and they won't always get it right. But to provide some guidance around that and maybe some simple rules, I think it is really impactful. And I think the 2 scaling journeys that I've been on where I've scaled businesses have all been about changing the way that we interact with our employees and how we get more from our employees, and they get more too.
Oh gosh, go! You have to tell us a little bit more about you've landed some carrots there now. So 3 things. First of all, you said about the Jaguar and Ford coming in, taking over in that change journey. That I'd love to hear more of. And then when you talk about the scaling and changing the way people interact with each other. So we must get to those 3, giving a sense of what was undertaken and how was the approach. So Ford taking over Jaguar, what when you hindsight look back on that, what worked, what didn't work?
Yeah, well, I think to be fair, I think it was a mature business. and it had a lot of tradition, and people were very proud to work there. It had huge pedigree. So I think that lots of positives there. I think also on the flip side of that, and I've seen this manifest in other businesses, much smaller businesses, sometimes when people are comfortable, they feel a tremendous alignment with what the organisation does. They maybe sometimes stay there too long, and maybe sometimes they get stuck in a particular role. So I think the Ford takeover of Jaguar, my recollection, and it was some time ago, was much more about sort of optimizing systems, processes, being much more efficient, more organized. It was less about people. It was less about culture. And of course, I think that it's well written, it's well documented that when you have mergers, there tends to be two cultures. And if they're aligned, that's fantastic. It's tremendous. But often they aren't. And there will be one dominant culture. And gradually, by sort of almost a process of osmosis, the dominant culture will prevail. And then either people will get on board or they'll feel uncomfortable and maybe move on to do something else. So I think my recollection there was it was a lot of system improvement, a lot of processing, putting process in place where it hadn't been in place. But it happened at a rate of knots. My goodness, I mean, the Ford must have had at the time a playbook for takeovers and how to integrate business successfully, because it did happen at pace. And as I say, I was I was very young in my career. I was in my early 20s. I was one that wanted to get on board and want to be part of it. Moreover, so that was really, really impactful. But yeah, I think I learned a lot about change management and the importance of regular two-way communication when you manage any kind of change. You've not just got to tell people what's happening or what's going to happen. You've got to listen. You've got to have your antennae. Your antennae have to be long. You have to very deliberately listen as to what's the drumbeat, what's the vibe from the shop floor to the boardroom about how people feel about the change and where we've got to, and not necessarily to identify barriers, but to identify opportunities where you can actually make change happen more effectively, more quickly, more efficiently. So there was a lot that I learned from that about change management.
Amazing. And then the two scalings that you were part of, tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think I'll start with a phrase that I'm sure you've heard: distributed leadership. Now, I think it's quite common in SMEs. I'm sure it might be common elsewhere, but it's definitely common in SMEs, particularly where you've had a very charismatic leader, maybe the founder, who've actually done an awful lot. They've invested a huge part of their life in building something, and it's very difficult to let go, because often whether it's a combination of the people they've hired or how people have sort of realized they need to fit in with that very charismatic, very vocal, often very determined leader, that they interact in a certain way, and they're often waiting for instruction and not necessarily taking enough initiative, maybe sometimes even being fearful of making the wrong decision or the wrong choice that's not aligned with what the leader would have wanted. So I think actually you get perhaps too much caution. And I think one thing that's really interesting is trying to change that. And of course, it can't happen overnight. No cultural change does. But trying to change that very gradually to make people feel comfortable that, one, they can be heard, and we want to hear what they think, and we want to hear what their ideas are. But more importantly, they are empowered to go and enact them. So things like tools like cross-functional teams is a great way to start, because you're not highlighting any individual, you're not pushing them into the limelight, but actually in a group charged with a problem to solve or an opportunity to realize, an issue to address, that cross-functional team where you start to bring together people out beyond the silos of their normal working day. And sometimes those silos are quite entrenched, sometimes they're not, but actually encouraging people to think, well, you can actually work with somebody from a different department on this. You don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to pass the baton. You can actually do it together. So things like cross-functional teams, hugely beneficial. Self-managed teams, a stage further. So, they know what the outcomes we're looking for. They know the why. Let them work out the how. But just make sure there's some sort of reporting mechanism, so the accountability piece is there, that they can report back on their progress, and actually their roadblocks as well. So things like having regular reporting process. So, well, what's gone well? What have you achieved? Where you're stuck? Where do you need some help? Is that extra resource? Is that a bit of guidance from somebody more senior or some expert elsewhere in the business? So I think that, that whole cross-functional team, self-managed teams piece is hugely beneficial when you're trying to change the way of thinking and encourage people and support people, importantly, to actually be more self-sufficient and not be tugging the leader's shirt tails every 10 minutes, which I've seen so many times. Yeah.
And then gives them the kind of that courage, because you're doing it as a team together. It's courage to, if we make this decision, I'm not holding it on my shoulders. It's us as a team is making it, because those first few decisions that are going to be made independently, where there isn't that that charismatic or that strong leader at the top who made all the decisions is making it, then because starting
it's sort of shared risk, shared reward.
shared risk, shared reward. Exactly. That's really good.
But if I may add just another aspect of this, it isn't just about encouraging and supporting employees to maybe make more decisions or to surface ideas and share those. So, the default should share information, rather than the default should be to protect information. But I think actually leaders need to relearn how they interact with employees. And one tool I've used there is previous business. We took the whole leadership team. So this is all the senior managers plus the directors. And we actually very deliberately did a leadership development program. Now, there were people who said, well, I don't need any of this. I've been here, done that, But actually, that's not the point. The point is, if we all do it together, we're all learning together. It's a shared experience. We're learning the same tools and techniques. We're speaking the same language. We're learning the same approaches. And actually, if you're so experienced, that'd be wonderful, because you can share all that experience with the other team who are on this development journey, and they can benefit from all the experience and the wisdom that you have. But we're doing it together. So I think that's a really helpful thing to do, thinking about not just about the maybe the more timid or the quieter employees who just want to get on with their work and they don't want to get involved in new projects or cross-functional teams. What about the leaders? You need to think about them as well.
Yeah. And then that goes back to, the leaders walking the talk, that's starting as well with them and having them. But the shared program, I like that. I really love that idea, because it also means, there's opportunities to give feedback to each other, to create a little bit of connection with each other, because you're going through this together. And also it can break down some of the egos that sit in the room where, they're not open to, or they never leave their guard down. I know it all. And then slowly by people sharing and being a little bit more vulnerable in the room and sharing, oh, I'm not good at that, but I'm really good at this. It helps others to give them permission to do it as well. And I think that all creates the trust then, because if they're not seeing leaders interact with each other and do that, then, that silo cross-functional will never happen, because if the leaders aren't doing it, then why should we do it? Because we don't see it. We can't be what we can't see.
Absolutely, that's a really important point, and I think you used the word vulnerable there, Marita. And I think it's important as a leader to show that you're vulnerable too. I think too often leaders think they have to have all the answers, have to make all the decisions, have to set the pace and the tone, and actually sometimes leading from the back and showing that you're vulnerable, that the reason that you're all here is because you are closer to it than I am. You understand this better than I do. And I sometimes it's good to be humble, isn't it? And so I think you can actually use that to advantage. So talk about, actually, I really don't know much about this. You do. You've been doing this 20 years, or you've been, you're out at the coalface, installing these products or whatever it may be. So I'm really interested in what you think and how you see it, because you know much more about this than I do. So actually deliberately position yourself as a naive resource in those cross-functional teams is a good call, in my view, rather than always thinking you have to lead the charge. And the other thing is knowing when not to be in those discussions. The fear of missing out. Sometimes deliberately exclude yourself. Let them get on with it. Say, well, I won't come to the next meeting. You know what you're doing. You know what we're trying to achieve. But I will come to the one after that. So I'll be interested to sort of catch up and see how you're getting on. So actually giving them some space to make the decisions rather than them all looking up the table at you. Yeah. When it comes to a decision point. So I think, demonstrating that you're vulnerable too, and letting them get on with the work, the doing, even if you're helping with the thinking.
Yeah, we had a lovely example of that in one of our clients where the MD was joining calls, but some of the juniors were not speaking up because of just being slightly intimidated by, I'm quite new in my role, I don't know it all, so I'm afraid to make a suggestion or ask the question. And just removing the MD, not from all the calls, but saying don't be there every Monday for that, check-in session. And it transformed the team, because suddenly then the juniors were speaking up. And then when the MD was back in, they were more confident even speaking up, because they've had the chance to ask the questions and have the discussion, and they know that they're standing on safe ground. So yeah, that is really good. That's stepping out. And I think that you talk about micromanaging, but that's even if you are not a micromanager, just your presence alone can inhibit.
It changes the tone. Yeah, it does. Yeah, even if you don't realize it. So I think it's not just stepping out, it's maybe also knowing when to be quiet. So, sometimes creating a deliberate vacuum in the discussion. And not trying to fill it, not feeling anxious that you have to fill the vacuum when there's silence. Maybe it's just people are reflective. They're thinking about what they want to say because they're a bit more hesitant. They're not used to saying it. So you're right. I think it's creating the right environment where people feel comfortable to share ideas, to highlight things that aren't right, that sort of constructive challenge and being prepared to be challenged yourself. I don't make all the right decisions. I never have. I try to, and maybe most of the time I get them right. So maybe that's where I am, but I don't always get them right. So I think it's creating that environment. That's the leader's job, is to create the environment for the team to succeed. It's not to do all the work, or it's not to tell people what to do. Why hire people who come with a free brain and tell them all what to do? Yeah.
Yeah, the famous Apple stays. That Steve Jobs said that. And I had a manager, Keith, who he was great at taking people from their area of expertise and saying, if you have the right people skills, you can manage in any team. And he plucked me from my area of expertise and landed me in a complete different area, actually moved me to engineering to run the engineering department early on. And I was like, but I know nothing about engineering. He said, that's what will make you the greatest manager. And he was all very much going, the promoting an expert is actually a disadvantage. So that person who knows the most is actually a disadvantage, because they tend to then make all decisions, have all the answers. But by plucking them, and if they have the right skills, they should be able to manage anywhere. They make the best managers because they stand back and let the people thrive and do what they do. So well,
there's a really interesting parallel with and I'm hesitant to introduce sport, but I will. So coaches and players, the best players don't make the best coaches, and vice versa. So you're absolutely right. And interestingly, just building on that, one of the things I've done previously, we actually, as a senior team, identified that we had what we called knowledge leaders, and we had people leaders. So actually we created very deliberately two different career paths. So the people who weren't particularly good at managing teams and organizing people and inspiring people, because that's part of the leader's job, not just to manage them. Management is the easy bit. Leadership is much harder. But actually, they were really technically expert. So actually creating a path where you can become more technically expert and use that to help the organization, which is in parallel with, it wasn't subservient to, it wasn't it was just in parallel with those that actually manage teams, manage people and resources. So I think you can be deliberate about that. Yes,
absolutely. And then also what motivates people, because the for real experts who are motivated by being experts are not motivated all the time by leading people. So because it's taking away from that expert. So it's again what motivates people, where for me at the time it was very much, I was motivated by leading people, not being an expert. So it's what it motivates people as well. Yeah. Good. So going back then to those change ones. So what do you think is like getting the leadership to do some well, first of all, going from that leader-led decision making to that distributed management and distributed decision making. What else is important, Keith, for you and you?
Well, I think, it's quite an expansive subject, but thinking about company values. But if I may, just before we touch on that, there's a couple of other tools that I found really helpful when you're trying to encourage others to vocalize and actually participate rather than be passive, and because they're in the shadow of somebody more senior, more vocal, and that's actually building on something that I've done previously, is very deliberately creating a learning organization. So one of the tools that you can use to do that, so this is where the organization learns, not just the individuals in it, and one probably doesn't go without the other, but feedback. So I think you mentioned that earlier, the importance of feedback, and honest feedback, of course, but it can be done in a constructive way, not in a critical way, because that gets nowhere. That just puts people off. But one tool I've used, it's really, really simple, and that's learning reviews. Now, we're probably all familiar with using a learning review. If you run a project, it doesn't have to be a change program, but you run a project, and guess what? You take stock at the end. Well, how did that go? And what did we do well? And what can we do better next time? But actually using learning reviews almost every day. And so really simple tool, the end of every meeting, you ask two questions in turn. And the first is, well, what did we do well? and I want one answer from everybody in the room. And you go around the table, and there will be people who want to give 3 answers, and you have to stop them. One answer each. What did we do well? So let's actually recognise what we've done well, and then perhaps go around in the opposite direction. One answer each. What are we going to do better next time?
Yeah.
So that sort of, continuous improvement cycle applies to actually how we run meetings, how we make decisions, how we participate, whether we prepared for a meeting, whether we share papers, whether actually we've got all the information that we needed to make the decision. And it's not just decisions, actually. Well, are we on progress? Are we making progress? Are we on track? Are we moving in the right direction at the very least? So I think those learning reviews are really helpful. And I've used them in all kinds of settings, whether it be one-to-ones with individuals, or whether it be board meetings, and they're really helpful in board meetings to actually,
And it's in the board meetings is where I've come across and used this in a similar fashion. And it's like, our people say, did we ask enough questions? How can we make more space for questions? Are we making sure everyone's involved? So you uncover what is, and actually instead of dictating what's not working well and trying to increase, what you're doing is getting from the participants what is not working well. Love that. What do we do well?
Well, that's an interesting point on board meetings, actually. Board meetings, and I've done a lot of this. I'm a chartered director, and I've been on more than 20 boards through my career, more than. Board meetings should be for deciding, not reporting. And what often happens is people will burn the agenda time by reporting on what they've been doing. So it's looking in the review mirror, what's already happened, when that should be in the board papers, and you should have, everyone should have read it, and use the board meeting for the debate and the decisions. So what are we going to do, not what's already happened? So yes, deciding, not reporting. And I think it's one of the skills of a good chair is to make sure that's the tone of the meeting, rather than just coming and presenting what's been going on. Yeah. That's a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah, and then people just come in and listen. Then they just come in, sit back, listen. There's no need for preparation because I'm going to hear it all in the meeting anyway. But what happens after time is like, what impact are you having? And then you kind of go, well, I'm not really doing anything in here. I'm just coming in, sitting, listening, giving my as we say in Ireland, a speak every now and again, and voice every now and again, but actually you're not having any impact. But so one of the boards I sit on, it's taken 1.5 years, and I'm chair, it's taken 1.5 years to get to the point, Keith, of that presented to for the entire meeting to no presentation, and we just have those 15 minutes on this topic for questions. And for them to feel comfortable to go, and lots of hands going up. It's taken 1.5 years, I would say, to get to that point, because gradually encouraging it. But it's taken a while to.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. It obviously depends how frequent the meetings are. If they're every month, then they maybe could move a bit quicker. If actually they're only once a quarter, which often they are, that's actually that's good progress. It does take time. Yeah,
it does take time for that mindset shift. And you have to keep pulling people up on and what could be. But I love that what can we do well? And as you say, it could be used in one-to-ones. It can be used in teams, boards, everything. What did we do well? And I think that's the first question, because we often forget that, is the recognizing the successes, because we are so good to find the fault and the what's not working. But the what's working
well. It's natural. I think human nature, particularly the sort of personality types that might be in more senior roles, they're doers. They want to see progress, they want to achieve results, they want to feel like they're adding value. So it's normal. I think actually pausing to say, well, let's recognize what we have actually achieved, because we could have achieved nothing, this would take the extreme, or we could have gone backwards. And particularly in the last few years, there's been some strong headwinds for businesses, particularly small and medium-sized ones. So let's recognize where we have done something positive, we have made an improvement, and then let's build on that. Well, okay, so what can we do next? So it's quite specific. It's not what could we do better, it's what are we going to do better next time? And then obviously capture that. And when you start your next meeting, guess what you've got in front of you? You've got the list of all the things that everybody said that we're going to try and do better. So that's the starting point of the next meeting. So you're building on, you're reinforcing that positive change. Yeah.
Love it. So I've had 2 conversations with 2 people in the last, I would say, 4 weeks, and both HR directors, and they are struggling to influence the culture because the leader, MD, CEO, whatever, is not people focused or doesn't see the value in it. So what they were questioning was, what can I do to influence this kind of leader to see that it's worth investing in the people and the engagement and the culture, because it has better outcome. We'll have, and that they were really struggling. They were like, what do I do? What would your advice be, Keith, in those situations?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? There are many things that we measure, and there is a mantra that you can only manage what you measure. We measure quite a few things, I'm sure. And at one extreme, you might have, I don't know, the three key things that the three key measures of success for an organisation, and at the other extreme, and I've seen it in National Health Service, NHS trusts. There was a colleague who was a very seasoned NHS non-exec director, and they were absolutely bewildered at their first board meeting because they asked the question, "What are our KPIs?" There were more than 300.
Oh my God.
More than
Wow.
300. Exactly. Yeah. So they're not KPIs.
Wow.
They're PIs, but they're not KPIs. So I think you've got to be careful what you measure. And one of the challenges, I think, for leaders is it's really, really hard to measure employee engagement, employee development and improvement, how the organization is learning, so it's becoming more capable, more resilient, more sustainable. It's really, really hard to measure that. So we sort of don't measure it, or we don't bother. And one tool that I found really helpful is, I think try and get leaders to think about who's the audience. If the audience is a shareholder meeting once a quarter or investor group, they want to hear about the numbers. Of course they do. Start with the numbers. That's okay. If you're talking to employees, sort of monthly town hall meeting, what's most important to them? Yes, of course, they want to know the company's doing well. They want to see that there's some measure of success of all their collective efforts. But actually, I used to always start, and still do to this day, I always start the town hall meetings with people. Who's new, who's joining the team, welcome them on board, make them feel comfortable. Who might be leaving, well, thank them for all they've done. Actually, who's been promoted or who's done some great stellar work. So all those shout outs all start with people first. Then we turn to the numbers, and then we turn to what we've been doing and what we're going to do. But actually, that sends a real strong signal to employees that you are important and you feel and you are valued. Yeah.
Then what's important, putting that first, sending that message. Yeah. Then the company numbers, and then what we're going to do next. Yeah. Oh, I love that for the town halls, because not every company does town halls, and I think it's really good to have even that simple structure. It doesn't have to be massive. You don't have to make it can just be very simple, but it helps that communication and.
It does. And just building on that, I think part of the reason why some businesses don't do it is it's a huge time commitment.
Yes.
If you just do half an hour every month, but that's 100 employees, my goodness, that's more than a week of people hours. But what they don't try and measure or contemplate is how impactful that can be. So, yes, there's a cost, but what about the return on that investment? And trying to measure that is really hard, but it's massive. It's absolutely massive, because one of the leaders' key principles or key important roles of a leader is to align the team. So one, they're clear on what we're trying to do. Two, how far along the journey have we come? What's next? What's coming? What bumps in the road have we got to navigate around? So I think those regular check-ins and it should be two-way, it's not just preaching, it should be two-way communication, is just a sense check of, well, this is where we're at and this is what we're trying to do and this is what's coming next, and thank the team. I always end every single town hall with thanking the team for all their efforts, all their hard work, all the contributions. That's really important. So yes, I think if you don't do it, you really are missing a huge opportunity, because people will still communicate. They'll just be communicating through the unofficial channels and either worrying or speculating or actually detracting from what the business is trying to do. And one other key learning I'd like to share is when I've done this before, it tends to be the leader stood at the front talking to the team. And that could be for the whole 30 minutes because nobody feels comfortable to come and join them at the front. Yeah. But very gradually, very subtly, changing the tone. So actually, it's no longer the Keith show, and that might take 3 to 6 months. Yeah. Actually, it's the team's event. Yeah. And there are a number of different presenters at all levels of the organization talking about. It could be a really small initiative in, the machine shop, for example, but they've done this really great bit of work that's really improved efficiency or reduced lead times or whatever it might be. Let them talk about that for 5 minutes. Let them have a bit of limelight and get recognition from their colleagues. Or it could be actually, we've just won a huge contract in the Middle East, and this is transformational, and there's lots of work coming as a result. We've got to get ourselves organized quickly, or whatever it may be, and that might come from the sales director. So actually having that cross-section of presenters, and importantly, making it, if you can, try and make it participative. So maybe there's some questions, or maybe, so to your point earlier, it doesn't just happen in board meetings. Great questions often happen in town hall meetings. If you're prepared to listen, if you're prepared to ask, and create the environment where people feel comfortable to ask those questions in front of their peers.
Yeah. And I had a gorgeous example of is a construction company in London now that we've worked with, and they were doing the town halls, and then they wanted to take it to an extra level because their town halls were really big, and they had to do a lot online as well. Then when COVID happened, and also because they're so spread across the country and world, they then started he started to ask me anything sessions. So he would go and have smaller on-site ones where he'd be face to face, and he called them, instead of repeating what he does in the town hall, he then asked me anything. So it was, the whole thing was, we're going to just sit here for 30 minutes, and if you ask me nothing, we're just going to sit here. But the whole point is for them to try and get those questions coming in, you know, what's the direction of the company, why do we do this, why have we done that, and that understanding. And he found that really, really powerful, and I thought that was a great kind of extension from the town hall, especially if you're in a larger company where you may not be able to have that interaction. Doing those little sessions. Love it.
I love that. I think it's interesting, isn't it? You tend to, if you're observant, and you should be, you spot that actually it's sort of the same faces who are asking the questions at town hall meetings. It's time to evolve that. And as you say, one thing you can do is, I call them the cup of coffee chats, you know, where you just put 30 minutes in your diary, or 20 minits. 20 minutes is probably enough. Actually, you know, a cross section of employees, the ones who are less vocal, but you know they've got great ideas because you know they're committed. And actually just say, well, let's just have a chat. There'll be 3 of us, you know, or 4 of us. We'll just go and have a cup of coffee. And actually, I'm really interested to know, how's it going? What's been going on? And actually, they feel much more comfortable to vocalize in a smaller group. So yes, it's been sensitive to that and recognizing that, you know, different means, but ultimately it's all about communication, and communication has to be two-way. You haven't got 2 ears, 1 mouth. Yeah, that old analogy. So actually, a leader's job is to listen more than they speak. And creating the environment where there's opportunity for people to talk about what they're doing, what the frustrations are, what the problems are, what the issues are, what solutions they've got as well. Is really, really impactful.
So one of the questions, what we ask is what is the listening mechanisms that are in your organization? Because, you know, of course, being a culture organization or culture consultancy, we do surveys, but they're just one way of listening and hearing and finding out what the story is. And what you're talking about there is that listening mechanism. So there's so many different ways, and the better if you have a variety, because you will reach those maybe people who don't want to answer in survey, won't put up their hand in a town hall. How are you ensuring that you're reaching them in different methods, different ways, but that listening mechanisms to find out what's working, what's not working. Back to the what's working, what's going well, what's not.
What do we do next? Absolutely, And it's interesting. I mean, I've used surveys, employee engagement surveys or employee attitude surveys. I've used those to good effect. But I think what I'm also always mindful of, because we all get surveys, don't we? And they don't, you know, if we're using them for marketing purposes, they don't have a particularly high response rate. Even if you've got an engaged workforce, you know, exemplar employee engagement, you know, if you get more than 60%, you know, do pretty well. So actually, you're right. I'm always mindful of that. So listening mechanisms. I think it's one thing I've learned is, why are you doing the survey? Because there will be people who are hesitant to really say what they think, or they'll have a complete offload. So actually having somebody independent, this is a huge learning for me, having somebody independent, completely external to the organization, to actually then not only work out what the survey should include or shouldn't include, but actually to orchestrate the survey. So it gives it a heightened sense of anonymity, it's confidential, it's objective. And then, of course, there's no names, but then they can say, well, there was an interesting comment, actually. I think this is something we need to unpick and we need to do something about. And actually providing that as a vehicle, again, it's a different mechanism for listening. But I think actually that's really valuable. Have somebody external. And that's a very similar principle if you start to get insights from your customers, for example. I've used investors in customers. Most people have heard of investors in people. Not many people have heard of investors in customers. So this net promoter score, that's again, very deliberately, because you know most customers who engage in service will either, because they're very engaged, they like your company and they'll tell you wonderful things, or they're really, really not happy and then they'll tell you other things. The bits in the middle, you miss. So having somebody impartial, independent, who does this every week and
Yeah.
has lots of shared organizational learning from doing it for different organizations, will spot things that you won't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you're too busy to. So that impartiality, external resource, I think is really helpful when you're doing one mechanism for listening to employees.
And that independence as well, that it's more secure, they're independent, I can say it more safely because it's kind of my anonymity is guaranteed. But still, I think no matter what, whether you're doing it internal, whether you're doing it independent, I think people will engage massively when it's a first one as well, when it's really encouraged.
Yeah.
But also, what is their experience? Will this company listen and take action?
Yes, and do take action. Exactly. You have to act on the findings. Yeah.
So, because one of the things we say is, right, if you're embarking, not only, as you say, Keith, why are you doing this, or be very clear why you're doing it and what's the reason. But I was like, don't embark unless you're going to do something and you're going to shout about what you're doing, because unless you prove to these, they will never trust you in another survey to take action, and they'll be pointless. You'll have killed the whole survey. And only picking maximum 3 things that you're going to do, because we can't do everything, but explaining, these are all the scores, we can action everything, these are the ones we're going to action because these are going to have the biggest impact, or these ones we can afford to action. There'll be something we'd really like to do but we can't afford it yet. But being really clear what you're going to do, why you're doing it, here's what we're doing, and repeating that. We have to hear something 7 times before it goes in our heads. Is key with that communication of, this is what we've done since the last survey, this is what we've done since the last survey, and this is what we're still going to do. Yeah, we're still working on that because we know we're not good on it. And communication comes up so often, Keith.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's basic, isn't it? It's fundamental, actually. No, it's more than basic. It's fundamental. But interesting, you use the word we. These are the things we have done. These are the things we've enacted. We listened. We've done. We. Who are we? Is we the leadership team, or is we the employees? All of us. It's all of us. And one of the things that you mentioned very early on, and thank you, very gracious, Director of the Year. One of the reasons that I was recognised by that is I went on a huge culture change journey with the previous business that I was CEO of. It did create, from a very autocratic organisation, very command and control. It was actually established by an ex-World War II brigadier. Yes, that gives you a flavour of the kind of company it was way back when, a long time ago. But we went on a huge culture change journey very deliberately, and it became a learning organisation. And it's a case study that the CIPD have allowed me to present at their national conference more than once. And part of that learning journey, part of that development, I think, was around. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. What was I going to say? You triggered a thought, Marita. We were
talking about the we. We were talking about the we.
We. Thank you. Yes. Back on track. Right, I'm back in the room.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. So I think one of the learnings is, yes, doing employee attitude surveys independently, impartially, somebody external, great. You have to prioritize. You can't do everything. And some things you've got to sort of filter a little bit, because is that just 1 or 2 people, or is that actually a real issue? Yeah. But actually, really importantly, and the most transformational thing was getting people involved to deliver the changes. So things like cross-functional teams. One of those cross-functional teams, in fact, one of the very early ones, was a culture change team. A diagonal cross-section. So I was involved. I need to show this is important as CEO. We had one other director. We had a couple of the senior managers. We had a sort of couple of the more junior managers, less experienced managers. We had a team leader from the shop floor. We had somebody from the product development department. It was about 8, 9 people. I think it was an odd number, but we had about 9 people. It was very deliberately finding people who became change champions, but came from different levels of the organisation and different parts of the organisation. And importantly, their job wasn't just to say, well, we've got this long list of potential improvements for the business that have come from our employees, voice of the employee, but actually were the eyes and ears. Were the eyes and ears of how that change is happening, where there are roadblocks, where there are other issues that's uncovered. So actually, to actually be the disciples of that change was an important role of that change committee, or if you like, or culture change committee. So I think that's another big learning is, if you're trying to deliberately change the culture, and you have to as a leader, or it'll just change. So it's going to change anyway. So you better try and steer it in the right direction. Yeah. So getting employees involved to deliver those changes, if the all comes from the top every single time, my goodness, you're going contradictory to all those things we've just been talking about. about getting people involved and getting them to participate.
Brilliant, brilliant. That diagonal cross section is fantastic. Disciples of change. I love that statement.
Yes.
Become the disciples of change. Because it is, and it's a real that you start, it's like the snowball. It's so hard to get going, get that boulder moving, and you have to push every slight inch that you're taking. But then when it starts getting a bit of momentum, it's that positive momentum of, that positive creates positive, and positive behavior creates that positive behavior. But having those, as you say, culture champions and those disciples to keep that going, and making sure it's on track, as you say, that snowball is on track, that we're going in the right direction, working, or do we need to come back a little bit and go a different direction? Is really key.
And of course, you can invite people to be part of this who want to be part of it, but also you can be, like all good teams, you can be deliberate. Actually, think about different personalities, so you have a balanced team. So you might actually have one or two detractors in there deliberately. The people who are going to be that sort of, question everything and say, well, just a minute, is that going to work? Or, I'm not sure that's going to land well, or, oh, that'll never happen. So you need some of those voices, because then actually you can encourage the rest of the team to think about, well, how are we going to navigate around that? How are we going to make it happen? It needs to happen. How are we going to make that happen? How are we going to bring these people with us rather than leave them behind? So I think, sort of that cross section isn't just, function, department, isn't just seniority. It's also got another dimension. This is where it gets really interesting, is actually trying to find people where you bring some different personalities. But it's a massive opportunity for personal growth for the people involved, because they suddenly have a holistic view of the business, which they may have never had.
Very powerful, very powerful. And bringing detractors, love that, to bring in one or two detractors who are negative and who've had maybe the bad experience, because they also not only changing their mindset, but helping you navigate the others, who it can be very powerful, the detractors, because they can, negative is always more powerful than the positive. And if they help you navigate how to bring those people on board, it can really help. And we talk about that reboarding for the people who've been there a long time. They can be the ones that have the biggest challenge to shift any mindset, not the new ones coming in who are passionate and enthusiastic and are, more agile and ready to learn how the company operates, but it's reboarding those people who've been there a while as well, who may be.
You're right. There's an opportunity, isn't there? There's an opportunity to use this as a mechanism, and it's not the only one. I mean, another one might be, some other cross-functional team that's dealing with another conundrum that the business has. So I think, getting people involved in things is an opportunity for them to take a step out of their furrow that they're stuck in, maybe, and actually be part of some change that is less threatening to them individually or their department, because actually it's cross-functional. So, but then to see the benefits of change and how change is managed successfully, it's a real learning opportunity for them. And then they're less resistant to it next time when it is a bit closer to home. But I think in terms of the longer standing employees, again, this is an interesting conundrum. Let's not assume that businesses aren't used to and familiar with change. There are lots of businesses that have a lot of change. They have to. So actually, the fact that somebody's been there a while doesn't mean that they're resistant to change. They might have had a lot of change. I mean, look at the NHS, change overload, perhaps. So that's recognizing that as well, that some businesses are really good at change and they do a lot of it. So the fact somebody's been there 10 years, they've lots of experience of change, rather than a business that's a bit more stagnant, and there are plenty of those, where people haven't had experience much change and they've been sort of in a little bit of a cocoon, a little bit of a bubble. That is just as hard, but in a different way, I think. But I think for me, it keeps coming back to one of the other fundamentals, which is the values. What are the values of the organization? And using values not just to guide behaviors, but importantly to guide decisions, whether they're in the boardroom, whether in cross-functional teams, whether it's you as an individual. What's the right thing to do here? Excuse me. What's the right thing to do? And how does that align to our value set?
Absolutely. I've had two good discussions that you've just sparked the thought in my head of someone we were talking about, what do you do with someone who is maybe a high performer, like the great sales guy, who is treating everyone badly or is behaving against the values that some organizations protect these people because they're bringing in 32% of the sales, so they can't get rid of them, or they have this fantastic expertise that is really needed, but they don't behave according to the values, and then it kind of it really takes the floor away from trying to implement values across the business. So, you know, how to get leadership to understand that by leaving this person and not addressing this person who has some toxic behavior but is a high performer. What's your thoughts around that, Keith? How have you come across that, or have you had...
Oh my goodness, yes, plenty of times. And it's really, really simple. Let's not overcomplicate this or overthink it. They've either got to live the values or they've got to leave.
Yeah.
It's non-negotiable. These values are non-negotiable. And that doesn't matter whether it could be the CEO. They have to get in line with the values. Now, being pragmatic about this, they're a high performer, they've got expert knowledge, etc., etc., etc. All these other things that give us excuses why we don't deal with the bad behaviors.
Yeah.
So we have to do two things in parallel. One is we need to de-risk that person so we don't have a single point of failure. So if they've got special expert knowledge, give them an opportunity, you know, to actually share that knowledge, to teach others, to document their knowledge, put some process in place, yeah, to capture what they know, to make it more tacit. So I think there's things you can do to be on a change process ultimately of actually de-risking that individual's importance or criticality to the business. And in parallel with that, and it has to be in parallel with that, conversations about their behaviors, about the values. And if they've been there a while, that's part of the reboarding process to say, oh, interesting that, you know, I spotted that you did X or you did Y. I'm just interested. I'm curious, you know, so you're not being critical. No time for critical parent. This is an adult to adult conversation. I'm curious why you did that or why you thought that might be appropriate, or would they, and then explore, could there have been a different way of doing that? Would be more aligned with our values? Because it's important that our behaviors and our decisions are aligned with our values, isn't it? Yeah. So I think, yeah, those two things. One, you know, sort of reducing that single point of failure, and it takes time, and in parallel, questioning the behaviors. But ultimately, either they change or they go and work somewhere else. Yeah. It's a really hard decision, I get that, but it has to be taken. And you know what? Leaders aren't employed to make the easy decisions. They're employed to make the tough ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things at the end, you know, when we help companies work out what their values are, or the key question I said we must ask always is, are you prepared to fire for these? They're not real values, and it should, to live your values should be hard work. It should cause a little bit of pain, because if they're then they're not real true values if it's really easy to live by them. But are you prepared to fire? Because if you're not prepared to fire against these values and behaviors, then they are not true values, and they're just words on a wall at the end.
Exactly. Noble words. Yeah. Really interesting. I was very fortunate, it's about 10 years ago, to go on a exchange program. So this was a group of business leaders from the UK and also some business leaders from California. And the exchange program took us to Silicon Valley. And we met some absolutely fantastic, and some of them household names, companies, exemplar companies. So, for example, I went to visit LinkedIn and I met one of the founders, Alan Blue.
Yeah.
Went to Symantec, so Norton Antivirus, you probably heard of. Yeah. We also went to Berkeley University, Stanford University. So visited lots. It was a very intense week, and visited lots of really interesting companies. But the takeaway from every single one was that culture doesn't eat strategy for breakfast. That's old hat. Culture is strategy.
Yeah.
Culture is strategy. And you can't have a strong culture if you don't have a strong set of values based on your principles that guide behaviors and guide decisions. And you've got to live them. And as a leader, that's your job. It starts and ends there. You've got to live those values.
Love that. Love that. Culture is strategy, Keith. There's the statement of the day.
Well, it is, because, you know, what I've observed, and I've supported lots of companies to help them articulate their strategy, and there's some sort of tried and tested tools and a process to follow, actually. It isn't just throwing things at a SWAT dartboard. There's a process to follow. But ultimately, what we need to consider is, if you're looking at your competitors, so you're looking at other people, a bit like you, bigger, smaller, that are working in your market space, their strategy ain't going to be too different. You know, better products, more markets, more efficient processes, something like that. But it won't be hugely different. What is absolutely unique and totally potent for your future success is how strong is your culture. Because that's your magnet to attract talent, to develop your talent, to retain your talent, to get your talent to perform, to achieve your goals. The culture is absolutely key. Culture is your strategy.
Yeah, Culture is your strategy. So just wrapping up then, Keith, what would be, if you've a new leader coming in into a CEO, MD type position, and they can see that, they've been there a little while now, and they can see that the culture needs a shift. What would be your one advice to them approaching that?
I think to plan some kind of process, and that process isn't just the actions you're going to take, it's the communication you're going to make. So I think actually to map it out rather than just start and then realize, and I've done that. This is why it's a learning for me. The first time I tried this, it was a bit sort of learning as I go. I'm much better equipped now than I was, sort of 15 years ago. So I think it's to have a plan, but to be agile enough that the plan doesn't define what you do. The plan can change, but to have a plan. And that plan is, well, what are the key steps and stages along this journey? Where would I like to be? What do I think I'm going to need to do? But most importantly, in parallel with that, there's a communications plan. And that communication plan has to have more listening in it than talking. I think that's the key. Yeah.
More listening than talking. Love it. Love it, Keith. Well, we'll wrap up there. I'm going to stop recording now.